down into the family rather than the values of the family expanding up into the state. And I think the main mechanism for that is called television. Everybody sits around, watches a program that's been programmed by somebody far away whose sole purpose is to be popular. And unwittingly, what's happening is the values of the abstract community are overwhelming the values of the human family. I don't want to dwell on this because it's not a very happy topic, but just to give you one example that I think I have in my book, there was a divorce took place in San Francisco some years ago, not in itself an uncommon occurrence, but the ex-husband in this relationship was talking about how he's going through this legal process and said, I have to get something out of this relationship. You know, really looking at it as a business contract. And that's where like the formal, what is it, Gesellschaft versus Gemeinschaft? It's Gesellschaft values seeking down into the Gemeinschaft, into the human community. That's, so obviously family values, there they go again, they've got our word. Family values are a way of restoring society if we would build it up from the nucleus instead of having it come crashing in from the externals. Yes, Lisa? Your name is what? Sarah, sorry. I didn't catch the last part. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah, Sarah's question, I mean, I thought I was being philosophical, is about, you called it planned obsolescence, but I think what you're really talking about is the second law of thermodynamics, that everything runs down over time. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I guess because our economy depends on overconsumption in the sense we have to consume more than we need, we have to change that value of sustainability to one of obsolescence. You know, you've got the latest model of blah, blah. And, you know, we're all susceptible to this. I had this cell phone and I showed it to my granddaughter and she laughed out loud and I thought I had to go and buy myself a new one. You know, I was totally not on time with that stupid little Nokia. I'm sorry, I'm not offending anyone. So now that I understand what generally you're talking about, Sarah, what? Okay. About, oh. You know, I don't think that the planned obsolescence value would necessarily conflict with regenerability because in the sense that I'm using it here, we have to have a belief that however violent, dehumanized the person has become, that there's a core of that person that has not been violated. And that has to be touched, and we have to restore the person from that core. And when you say that core does not exist, this is basically the Manichaean heresy. You're basically believing in the absolute existence of evil, basically. And where the planned obsolescence piece would come in is that, you know, how often do you renew, and where does continuity balance with renewal? That would be a little bit different in each case. Okay. This is terrific. So yes, Michael. Yeah, there's. This is. There was a, in the middle of the 3rd century, there was a man in Persia. His name was Mani. I don't know why. I know you're not Persian, are you? But you're closest I can come right here. Oh, okay. All right. There you go. So in that sense, I'm from Brooklyn. Yeah. His Greek name was Manichaeos, which we get Manichaean from, and this belief is fostered on him, though I'm not entirely sure he actually believed this. But anyway, the belief that the universe was an interplay of absolute good and absolute evil, and each of those had the same ontological reality. You know what I mean? Had the same degree of realness. They were both absolutely real, and so the world was going to be a continual fight between good and evil because evil could never be completely overcome. Now you compare this with Gandhi's outlook, and he makes a challenging statement that evil exists only insofar as we support it. If we could withdraw all our support from it, it would cease to exist, whereas good can never cease to exist. That was his belief. Ein guter Mensch in seinem dunklen Dränge ist sich des rechten Weges wohl bewusst. A good person, and we're all good people, even if we get caught up in very dark drives and behaviors, we know perfectly well what's going on, and that knowledge can be touched in the right way. We can be regenerated. Yeah. Arby? Okay, good question. How does this non-belief in the absolute existence of evil, how does that tie into the story that I repeat endlessly of the Native American grandfather with the 2 wolves fighting inside of him? I believe that that's true in practical terms on the individual level. I mean, Manichaeism works not as an absolute description of reality, but as a handy thumbnail version of what we have to do every day in our life. Because in practical terms, folks, and I'm sorry to have to add this, I don't think we have the capacity to completely withdraw our attention from evil. So Gandhi's thing remains hypothetical, mostly. However, are you following me? You know, I can withdraw my attention from evil partly, but then, you know, I'll walk past a billboard and off it'll go again. Or somebody who's running for office will annoy me, and off it'll go again. So it remains hypothetical, but it's also very practical because in real terms, in the phenomenal world that we live in, it's a matter of degree. And in that world, the more I withdraw my attention from, okay, I'm calling it evil, I think you know what I mean, harm, destruction, lack of life, the more we withdraw our attention from that and put it on the good side, the stronger it will be. And it's not possible for a person to completely eradicate his or her sense of reality, his or her goodness. But it is possible for a person to completely eradicate his or her evil. And I think we've come pretty close with people like Gandhi, actually. It's very rare, but it happens. So, you know, you remember Boulding's first law. And if you were peace studies majors should be aware of Kenneth Boulding. I'm really jealous of him. He has a law named after him. As you know, I've tried 3 or 4 times, but they don't seem to stick. That's right, depending on you people. Boulding's first law is that anything that has happened is possible. Okay? Yeah. Boulding's first law, anything that has happened is possible. And the way I'm applying it right now is because we have had a few human beings who have just about, in all practical terms, eliminated the last vestige of selfishness within themselves, it shows that that's possible to happen. Now, some people think, okay, it was okay for them because, you know, well, he was brown or he didn't have any hair or no teeth or something like that. But I think all of those things have got to be very superficial. You know, the other position is that if one person was able to do this, then theoretically any person can. Therefore, we ought to rebuild our culture on that basis and make it possible for the maximum number of people to get the furthest ahead with this that they can. And what we've got now is like a classic image of the exact opposite. I mean, I just got a notice in the mail the other day from my car dealer. Yes, I own a car. I'm sorry. At least it's a Prius. Okay. So here's this advertisement from a Toyota dealer in Santa Rosa, and on the front cover in big bold red letters, it's all about you. It's not about fuel economy. It's not about saving the environment. It's not about having a safe car to drive in. It's about my little ego. That's going to make me run in there and have an oil change right this very week. Yeah, I'm feeling I'm sort of a little bit out of control here today. It's okay. Amy? Yes, Gandhi said, in fact, he prefaced that by saying it is my absolute conviction that anyone can achieve what I have achieved if they cultivate the same determination and faith. Amy? Shannon? Right. Yes. Yes, isn't that interesting? When people do achieve this, and as I was saying to our Jesuit friends last week, the point of an avatar, somebody who reaches this pinnacle, is not to fix the world, but to show how the world could be fixed. And instead we do the exact opposite. And this was my attitude to Gandhi before I started having spiritual practice of my own. I thought, boy, you know, that's terrific, but I can't go there. You know, for one thing, this fasting, sorry, I need my 3 squares a day. That's all there is to it. You arrest me, put me in prison, and take away my food, I'll sign anything. I'm being slightly facetious, but I just did not feel that that was what he did was humanly possible for me. And this is part of the belief that evil has an absolute existence and we can never totally overcome it, is we take these people and say they weren't people. That's why this new film, Lage Raho Munabhai, has been so successful, because it de-deified Gandhi. It took him down off the pedestal. In fact, the first thing that Gandhi says in that movie was destroy every Gandhi statue in the world. It was part of the point of that film. Yeah. Amy? Yeah. Yeah. That's right. And well, just to repeat what Amy was saying just a second, that the good thing about Gandhi is that A, he was close enough to us in time that he's well documented, and B, he got to do his own documentation. Guess what? We never let people do that. You know, we tell their story for them. I wanted to, and then you wanted to speak about the deification of Jesus and to a lesser extent the Buddha. They've tried very hard to keep that from happening in Buddha's case. And I wanted to say, the reason I made the comment last Thursday night, which I think probably infuriated most of the people in the audience about the Jesus of history versus the Christ of faith, is that in fact some people have been working very hard to see if it wouldn't perhaps be possible to get Jesus out of all of that mythologization and see what he actually was as a person. Now it turns out to be fiendishly difficult in his case because we have this nasty habit of executing avatars, and B, because he was one of those who didn't write anything. This is a movement, incidentally, that started in Germany in the late 19th or early 20th century. It's called Entmythologisierung, demythologization. And we're carrying it on today with very accurate historical tools. At first I thought that this was a big mistake, but now I'm thinking that this could actually be a tremendous benefit. And incidentally, that's why, I'm sure I'll get sued for this, so let's all go down together. That's why Mel Gibson did that movie of his, which could be called Wiedermythologisierung, a re-mythologization, taking the most negative, most violent parts of that religion and putting them up on a pedestal. And it's been followed by some imitators since then. It's a desperate attempt to re-mythologize Jesus, which I hope will totally fail. Yeah, Matthias. Yeah. Yes. It's hard to say how he. Yeah. Yeah. Well, one of the things that, I mean, in the last analysis, we know nothing about what he said or taught. But one of the things that seems to be somewhat trustworthy is when he would repeatedly say to people, you know, they would say, oh, you cured me. And he said, your faith cured you. You know, I was a mirror that enabled you to see that faith. Okay. Right. To get not exactly back to the subject, but you know, within range of the subject, I was going on about how much I like this set of terms, and I like it because we made it up this time, and it's a mysterious process. Nobody knows how you get language into the mainstream, or images into the mainstream, but we do know some things about it, and I'm happy to say that with my little nonprofit with a staff of 2, and volunteers, all of whom are in this room, that we have the services of a world-class marketing person. This has been really an exciting adventure, which is getting us to condense everything into 3 words and so forth. So we now know, I think, how important it is to get control of the discourse and not have our opponents tell us who we are. And even within the nonviolence community, I've been saying all along that most of the people who belong to what I call strategic nonviolence, they, in their own terms, they define us as moral, which is a term that I basically never use, because I perhaps have no right to, but because I think it's kind of misleading. So let's just compare this, just to stick with this idea for 1 second. If this is what we have in the criminal justice area, if you go and look at what we have in the environmental area, we have this term called sustainability. And you know, it's useful up to a point. I have a friend who has a law degree and a PhD in environmental science, and he did a song, kind of a karaoke thing with a friend of his, which went, unsustainable, that's what we are. And it's a very, very funny song. But the point I want to make is that sustainable, somehow this gets back to your point, Sarah, that it's like taking something that we've already got and freezing it, and that somehow doesn't do it for me. If you look here, to take another example, in the early years of the perpetual peace movement in Europe, the idea of perpetual peace mostly was that you take a contractual arrangement of non-conflict between 2 states and freeze it. And that would not work. And one of the very few people in the tradition who saw that this was not enough was Immanuel Kant. He wrote a book, a little essay called Zum ewigen Frieden on perpetual peace, but he said no, it has to be rooted much more deeply and organically and so forth. But first of all, a contractual non-conflict state is not peace. So you don't even have the energy there to work with. And second of all, it's a pipe dream to think that by getting people to sign on to the thing, it will stay there because they've signed it. During the Cold War, there was a study done of the average life of an arms treaty, and I think it was 2 to 2.5 years. It's about as long as they. But that was before the present regime got itself into power in Florida in the year 2000. So I think, so sustainable sounds a little bit too much like the mistake that was also made in the 80s in the anti-nuclear age, when our great rallying cry was survival. It's not enough. Do I want to survive? Yeah, but it's not the kind of thing that's going to rouse my most creative energies. And it was pointed out about 2/3 of the way through that decade that if we have a nuclear war, cockroaches will survive. They turn out to be very resistant to radiation, so have this whole planet of cockroaches like a science fiction fantasy. And I'm sure they would divide themselves into North cockroaches and South cockroaches and rebuild the whole thing. But the point that I'm making here is, again, these are kind of Manichaean terms. You see what I mean? That they're staying in the realm of the non-creative and the negative. And then we come finally, if we want to look at animal world, we talk about animal rights. And it's a similar problem, but a little bit different. I noticed that in Dwinelle Hall, if you walk and look at the display cases in Dwinelle Hall, there's one called Animal Advocacy, Student Council on Animal Advocacy. It makes a little bit more sense, but it's been pointed out, not just by me, but people who agree with me, obviously on the right side things, that the term rights is a bit abstract, and there's a point at which feminists are quite correct in this. We need to reground this in concrete living realities. And in fact, right at the end of World War II, when the UN came up with the Declaration of Human Rights, they thought, oh, Mahatma Gandhi is going to be our man, we'll get him to sign this thing right away. They went to him and he said, come back when you've got a Declaration of Human Responsibilities and I'll be happy to sign it. He did not like the idea of rights because these tend to be things that you claim for yourself. Yes, John? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, there's a philosopher, if you've read this section in my book, you'll be very well aware of this, named Mary Midgley, and she is a passionate advocate of animals, what should we say, animal non-suffering, and animal empathy, our empathy with animals. And she said we're going to have to ditch the term rights, it doesn't work as a philosopher. It hasn't got enough substantiality to it. Close the door carefully, Shannon. Thank you. So this is one of the big pluses, several of the big pluses actually of restorative justice. It goes really right to the heart of things in a stealth way, which sometimes is necessary. We got to make up our own vocabulary, which is very, very helpful, and we should do that more often, figure out how to get our words out into mainstream discourse. As I mentioned last time, hang on 1 second, Marisa. As I mentioned last time, it is a very good example of globalization from below in the sense that we're drawing upon indigenous ways, indigenous mechanisms that have worked, and using them in the context of our own cultures. I was in the city of Atlanta a number of years ago, and 4 young white guys had burned down a black church, and they were apprehended, and they were sentenced to rebuild the church. And that was a very good example, and this is something that we could learn from the Navajo in this case. So that was one good thing about it. And then we have this variety of restorative projects going on, which could be used to build out to a whole constructive culture. And that's one of the things I'd really like to look at is, what are all the projects that are going on, and what pieces do they plug in the puzzle, and how can we get them all on one page? And you have things like the victim offender reconciliation programs. I think we did talk about those a little bit, and also some preventative programs where you apply education and other things like that, before people get involved in gangs. On Saturday in San Diego, I'll be talking to a man who lost his 26-year-old son to a ridiculous random act of gang-related violence, and he turned his whole life around, gave up a highly, highly successful, financially successful career, and now dedicated himself to keeping children and youth out of gangs. And he's now spoken to more than 3 million school children. There's also a fellow again in San Diego. I don't know why San Diego is so ahead of the curve in this. I think that even though I'm an honorary citizen of San Diego, I feel somehow more of an affiliation with Berkeley. Anyway, there's another person who is an American-born Buddhist fellow in a Thai lineage who's been taking South Asian youth and not just keeping them out of gangs, but getting them to take vows and ordination and wearing robes and the whole thing. And guess what? When they do that in their community, they get a tremendous amount of respect. And guess what? It turns out that if there's one thing that drives people to crime, it's disrespect. And that's not just me speaking, though if it were, of course, it would be enough. But psychiatrists, a couple, 3 of them, incidentally, Philip Zimbardo, who did some very important studies, he was here yesterday, so please go and see him. His wife is the head of the academic senate, and his daughter was a Pax major, so he's definitely a good guy, even though he worked at Stanford. But what I was saying is, one of the most common terms in the gang world is diss. He dissed me. And this particular psychiatrist I'm thinking of, who has dealt with the most dangerous, repeat violent offenders, he said one of the things that he commonly hears from them is, I never got so much respect as when I shoved my gun in that dude's face. It's all about, here I am generalizing again. I know I'm generalizing. Whatever is the penalty, I will pay it cheerfully. But if one had to generalize, at least if it's not the only cause, it's the single most effective way that we could get at crime prevention would be to get people some respect. Can we say?
I'm just going to say that I was talking to this farmer about the farming.